This is David. This is the third video in our series on Microsoft Playwright, a tool for writing and managing user interface tests that we can then automate. In the first video, I showed you how to create a test that navigated to a web page, entered some text, clicked some buttons, and validated that things appeared on the screen as they were supposed to. And in the second video, I created an Azure Playwright workspace right here, and I configured my application using this environment and that environment variable to point to that workspace and run my tests in the cloud. In this video, I want to show you how to configure this automated user interface tests to run as part of your CI/CD pipeline. And I'm going to use GitHub Actions as my DevOps tool to run those tests. Now, the actions in a CI/CD pipeline, that's continuous integration, continuous deployment, they contain a lot of moving parts. And so I've listed some of the parts that are required for this. We need a GitHub repository. We need to connect that GitHub repository to our local Git repository that contains our tests. We also need to create a GitHub action. And GitHub action is just a way of doing something when an action occurs, such as when code is checked into the repository or when a pull request occurs, something like that. And in this case, that action is going to be to run these Playwright UI tests. And in that action, we're going to have some YAML. That's the markup language that defines what's going to happen and what triggers it and where it's going to take place. And in that YAML, we don't want to hard code things like where the Playwright workspace is and what subscription it is and what the credentials are for using it. So we're going to use some secrets to do that. And some of those secrets are going to point to an intra-app registration. And that intra-app is designed to create a service principal, which is the identity under which these Playwright tests will run. So we'll have to give that a contributor role, and we'll have to, in that, tell it that these are credentials specifically for running this particular workflow up here. Now, because these are interconnected, we'll be bouncing back and forth between those things in the demo. The first thing we want to do is to create a GitHub repository. We already have a local Git repository. I could go into the terminal window in Visual Studio and say Git status and see that there's nothing to commit. It's pretty clean, but there's no remote repository at all. That's what we want to do. We want to create a remote repository and connect this to it. The way that we do that is I'll navigate to my GitHub account, sign in, go to the repositories tab, and I will create a new repository. And because the local one is called Playwright Demo, I'm going to call this one Playwright Demo as well. And I don't really need to fill all this optional stuff out. I just want to create a repository, which just takes a few seconds. And there we are, we're done. Next, I want to connect this local Git account with that GitHub repository. And I do that with the following command: git remote add origin, and the name of my repository, which is this right here, followed by .git. And now what I can do is I can push to the main branch of that repository, git push -u origin main. So I'm going to put the main branch here up to the main branch in this repository. And now when I select code and refresh it, you can see that all the code that's in my local Git repository is now here in my GitHub repository out on the web. I mentioned earlier that there is information that a GitHub action will need, such as the location of the Playwright, the subscription it's running under, the security information, that I don't want to hard code. And GitHub has a place to store information like that. It's in its secrets. And if I go over here to settings and down to secrets and variables, then I can create secrets for GitHub Actions. These repository secrets here. I'm just going to create some of these with the names of the secrets as placeholders to remind me later on that I need them, because I'm going to have to find them in different places. So I'll create one for the Playwright service URL, and I'll just put the letter X in there as a placeholder. I'll create another one for the Azure Client ID, one for the Azure Tenant ID, and one for the Azure Subscription ID. And I'll come back later and add these. So the Azure, the Playwright service URL, we saw that in the last video. We're going to get that from the Azure workspace. In fact, let's go ahead and do that right now. Because we've already created that workspace. And when we navigate to the Playwright workspace, we can go to the Get Started, and we saw that here it gives us that URL right here. So I'll just copy that and paste it into this Playwright service URL. So one of these I've already got, update secret. The other secrets I'm going to get from an Entra app registration. And by registering an Entra app, then I can create a managed identity under which this action is going to run. And these things right here will point to that. So the way I do that is I navigate to entra.microsoft.com. And underneath Entra ID here, I select App Registrations. And I create a new registration. I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to call this one GCast Playwright Demo. Here, I say accounts in this organization directory and only, so it's not for consumers outside of there. It's only for my own Entra, my own directory, my own organization. And for the redirect URL, I can specify web, but I don't really have to put anything in here, and I'll just hit register. And that creates it. It only takes 1 second to create it. And I need some pieces of information out here. I want to know the name of this thing, GCast Playwright Demo, but also I want to know this application client ID and the directory tenant ID, because those are going to be the secrets that I am going to put into here. So the application client ID, as you can guess, is probably going to go right here. So let me update that secret. And the directory tenant ID, I'll grab that from here. And that is the Azure tenant ID, this secret here. And the last thing I need is the subscription ID. And I don't get that from here. I actually get that from Azure. If I go to portal.azure.com, I can search for subscriptions and find the subscription in which my Playwright workspace exists. And in here, I have the subscription ID. Let me copy that and paste that into the subscription ID. And now I have all the secrets that I need in here. By registering that application, I was actually creating a new identity, an identity that's managed entirely by Azure. And I need to give that identity permission to the GitHub repository that I've created. So there's a couple of steps that I need to do for that. I need to go into subscriptions. So this is the identity that I've created. It's called GCast Playwright Demo. And in here, I want to go into my subscriptions, and I want to assign the contributor role to that identity. The way that I do that is here under my subscription, I select Access Control IAM, and I add a role assignment. And here on the Roles tab, I can search for a role called Contributor. It's actually a privileged administrator role, so it'll be here, Contributor. There it is right there. And I'll click on Next, and from here, I can select the members of that role. There are already some members of that role, but I want to add this member right here, this GCast Playwright Demo. So let me copy that and search for GCast Playwright Demo. There it is right there. I select that, and now that application registration role or principal has, or will have, it will be then in the contributor role. Next, I want to give it permissions. I want to give that role permissions to the GitHub repository. And the way I do that is I go down here to certificates and secrets. I'm here within this app registration in Entra, and under federated credentials, I want to add a credential. And there are different scenarios for credentials. One of them is GitHub Actions deploying Azure resource. That's exactly what I want to do. I want to deploy some Azure resources from GitHub into Azure. Now that I have, that's going to ask me things like, what's the organization name? That's the GitHub organization. It's my account, David shared. What's the repository name? Let's find that here. It's called Playwright Demo. So let's go here. It is Playwright Demo. I think it's case sensitive. Better double check that. That I need to have a capital P. And the entity type will be on a branch. And the branch will be the main branch. And then we'll give a name to this, and we'll call it the same thing. We'll call it GCast Playwright Demo right here, and I'll add that credential right here. And now I've given this identity permission to that GitHub repository. The final step before we test this is to create the YAML, and the YAML is the language that tells GitHub Actions how to proceed, what steps to do. And we can do that here in our project. If we look, we actually already had a YAML that was created when we initialized Playwright, but I'm going to replace this with some different YAML here. And I'll walk you through all the steps of this. This is not really long, but it's not really short either. So first I give it a name to this, Playwright Test. That's fine. Maybe I'll call it Playwright Tests Demo, because that's what I'm doing here. And then what's the trigger? The on is the trigger. So whenever you push to the main branch or do a pull request to the main branch, that should trigger this, and all this stuff should happen. I've got some things about permissions. I'm using Entra ID, so I need this ID token and contents to be write and read as it says it's required. And then I have a job, and I have the first job, actually the only job, is the test job. I want it to, if nothing happens, then it just hangs after 60 minutes, just give up. I want it all to run on Ubuntu, so it'll create up a virtual Ubuntu environment, the latest version of it. And you see for the steps, I want to first check out. In order to check out, I'm going to log in with Azure PowerShell using Azure Login. And I mentioned before that I do need the client ID, tenant ID, and a subscription ID, because that's going to be the identity from that app registration. But I don't want to hard code them in there. When this gets to GitHub, it's going to use those secrets that I stored inside of GitHub. Then I'll install any dependencies. In this case, the only one I need is CI dependency. So I use the npm command to install that package. And then I'm going to run the tests. And I'm going to run them in a Playwright workspace in Azure. The URL is here, but I didn't hard code it. Again, it's going to get it out of the secret that's stored in GitHub. And this is the command to run tests. We saw that in the last video. npx playwright test. The configuration is playwright.service.config.js, which is this file right here. I specify the number of workers. It's really the maximum number of workers. This probably will only use once. It's so small. And then I want to say create a report, in this format. And then the last step is I want to upload a Playwright report. Uses this upload artifact. Do it always, and it'll be in that folder right there. That's where it's going to find it, in the Playwright report folder. That's right, which is here. And I'll save those reports for 5 days. I'll change it to 10 days. And I'll save this. And now, because I said the trigger should happen whenever there is a push to the main branch, Well, let's go into Git here and generate a commit command, and then say commit these changes locally to the Git repository. And now when I sync, that will do a push out to GitHub. So let's go out to GitHub and take a look at that. On the Actions tab, we should see, and we do, this thing running. It's queued up right now. It's not running yet. In a second, it'll find a node on GitHub in which it can run this GitHub action. And when it does, I'll speed up the video here because it might take a minute or so for this to run. It is done running. It took about a minute and a half, and we can drill into this and see some details about it, including this report right here. If I click on that, it then downloads a zip file that I can open up and extract and see the details of that report. In this video, I've shown you how to configure GitHub Actions to incorporate Azure Playwright UI tests into your continuous integration, continuous deployment pipeline. This is David. Thank you for watching.